I actually sat down to work on a tactical analysis of the Leeds game, but the more I watched it back, the more I realized two things. First, there was nothing generally interesting about that match from a footballing perspective. And second, I had this lingering feeling that we may have just witnessed Rúben Amorim's last game in charge as Manchester United manager, especially after that fiery post-match press conference. So instead of forcing a somewhat meaningless tactical breakdown, I want to do something more important. So in this video, I am going to shed some light on the real reasons why things didn't work out between Rúben Amorim and INEOS, beyond the headlines and beyond the results on the pitch. And more crucially, we are going to talk about some of the lessons that must be learned because at Manchester United, history has a tendency to repeat itself, especially when it comes to appointing the next manager. So without further ado, let's analyze. When Rúben Amorim walked into the press room after Manchester United's 1-1 draw with Leeds, most fans, including myself, expected the usual manager speak, measured, cautious, and focused mostly on, the match itself. What we got instead was something entirely different. Amorim didn't just explain a result, he framed his role, his identity, and his understanding of his job in public. And that alone was an event in itself. He said quite emphatically, I came here to be the manager of Manchester United, not to be the coach of Manchester United. Now, to most observers, that might sound like semantics, but in the football world, that statement carries enormous weight. When you tell the world that you see yourself as a manager, you are essentially saying that you want authority over more than just training and match tactics. You want to influence, or you want influence in recruitment, vision, strategy, and the long-term planning and evolution of the club. That's a very different job description from a head coach who is usually, tasked with getting the best out of the players. It's almost like the difference between a CEO and a department head in a company. One sets strategy while the other executes it. So don't be naive because Amorim's choice of words was intentional. To put it another way, imagine a programmer coming into a tech company and saying, I wasn't hired just to write code, I was hired to shape the product vision. So that's exactly the level of responsibility Amorim is hinting he expected. But of course, Manchester United's current hierarchy isn't structured that way. So we have a director of football, a CEO, and a broader decision-making apparatus that co-owns, recruitment and long-term planning. And that wasn't a secret, but Amorim's public statements make it clear that he felt something different was promised, or at least that something different was implied. And his comments didn't stop there. He went on to say that every department, the scouting department, the sports director, Jason Wilcox, need to do their job. That's not just a request for collaboration. In the context of football, it's borderline a critique of how the club is currently operating behind the scenes. A coach does not normally publicly tell other departments they need to do their job or do better, especially not a club as scrutinized as Manchester United. So this was not a normal post-match press conference. It was a strategic statement of intent by Rúben Amorim that laid bare the dissonance between what he thought his role would be and what it actually is within the Manchester United hierarchy. It set the stage for a very different kind of narrative at Old Trafford, not just about tactics and formations, but about authority, autonomy, and vision. At first glance, this whole debate might sound like ego, like semantics again, like a man getting hung up on job titles. But in modern football, manager versus head coach is not a linguistic quirk. It's serious business. And when Rúben Amorim says, I am a manager, not just a head coach, he's not talking about status. He's talking about power, responsibility, and accountability. And those three things are no longer aligned in elite football the way they once were. Because traditionally, especially in English football, the manager was the club. Sir Alex Ferguson wasn't just picking teams, but he was actually shaping recruitment, influencing contracts, deciding who stayed, who left, and even how the club functioned culturally. If something went wrong, responsibility was clear. If something went right, authority was justified. Okay, so that model is almost extinct. Modern elite clubs have deliberately moved away from it, not because it didn't work, but because it was too risky. So today, a head coach is closer to what you'd call a specialist. You know, his role is narrow, but extremely intense. You know, train the squad, implement a tactical game model, develop players, and deliver results with the resources provided. Recruitment is usually shared, long-term squad planning above the head coach, and club identity is institutional and not personal. So this is why clubs now talk about continuity even when managers change. It's why Manchester City did not collapse when Guardiola lost assistants, for example, or why Liverpool's recruitment machine keeps working regardless of who is in the dugout. So the system outlives the individual, in other words. And that is exactly the structure INEOS are trying to install at Manchester United. But here is the issue. Rúben Amorim is not that kind of coach. He's not. Because at Sporting, Amorim didn't just train players. He designed the ecosystem. Don't forget that Sporting was a club in turmoil before Amorim. The kind of turmoil where players got physically assaulted. And so recruitment was aligned to his 3-4-3 system. Profiles were chosen specifically for his pressing triggers, for his build-up patterns and positional play. When Sporting signed players, they weren't just buying talent. They were actually buying functions within the Amorim system. So when Rúben Amorim arrives at United and finds a structure where the director of football is the one who shapes recruitment, the CEO is the one who oversees the long-term planning, and the coach is just one voice among many, there is an immediate operational clash, right? So this is where Amorim's frustration becomes more understandable in a way, because here is the uncomfortable truth. If you're judged on results, but you don't control the tools, then tension is usually inevitable. So imagine a school principal being evaluated on exam results, but having no say over the curriculum. Or a film director, being blamed for a box office flop, while the studio is the one who picked the cast and rewrote the script. So that's the emotional logic behind Amorim's comments. So whether you agree with them or not, that's just a fact. And when he says that other departments need to do their job, what he's really saying is, don't hold me responsible for decisions that I didn't make. So that's not really rebellion, but that's more like, setting boundaries. So, however, and this is where the story gets complicated, Manchester United did not hire Amorim to resurrect the old model. So INEOS did not take over in order to find the new Sir Alex Ferguson. They took over to actually prevent the club from being held hostage and being too dependent on single individuals, okay? Because United's recent history is a warning sign. Moyes inherited a squad that was not built for him. Van Gaal clashed with the structure. Mourinho demanded more control. And Ten Hag was backed for too long and too blindly. So every time the club bent toward the manager and paid the price when it collapsed. So from INEOS's perspective, the head coach model is not restrictive, but it's actually protective. So this isn't about respect, it's not about titles or even results, and it's not even about Rúben Amorim's ego. It's about two different ideas of how football clubs should be run. And Amorim believes in a vision-led management, while INEOS, on the other hand, believes in structure-led governance. And Manchester United are once again caught between, the romance of strong leadership and the reality of modern risk management. So this is why those words mattered, because once a manager publicly defines himself against the structure, the conflict is no longer theoretical. So if you strip away the post-match quotes and the job title debate, this entire conflict comes down to one thing. Rúben Amorim is seeking clarity because he simply does not trust the people above him. And here I'm not, just protecting Amorim, but I believe that this is the key lesson for Manchester United here, because when you look at INEOS, their short history at Manchester United, it's not hard to understand why. So let's start with the big elephant in the room, Erik Ten Hag. So INEOS inherited an underperforming manager, and instead of drawing a clear line, they stuck by him, and for too long and too blindly. So warning signs were everywhere, tactical rigidity, dressing room fractures, recruitment misfires, and performances that never aligned with the supposed process. Yet INEOS chose patience, not cautious patience, but ideological patience. And that's important because in doing so, they sent a very clear message. That's it. We believe in backing the manager through turbulence. And that's not a neutral position. That's leaning towards a manager-centric model, whether they admit it or not. Okay, so when Amorim now hears talk about structure, long-term vision, and head coach models, he's right to question it, because actions matter more than press releases. And INEOS's first major football decision contradicted that very philosophy that they claim to represent. Now let's talk about Dan Ashworth, because this is where the credibility problem deepens for INEOS, because they kind of pursued Ashworth aggressively. They waited, they negotiated, they presented him as a cornerstone of the new footballing structure that they are establishing, and then within months they fired him. Why? Because they thought that they were hiring a recruitment specialist when in reality they hired an architect of recruitment processes. Okay, so that's not a small misunderstanding. That's actually a fundamental failure of due diligence. Ashworth does not pick players off lists. He builds systems that decide how the lists are made in the first place. So if you hire someone like that, expecting immediate transfer solution, like someone like Luis Campos, the problem isn't the employee, it's the employer, INEOS. So from Amorim's perspective, okay, so what does that say? It says that the people defining the structure may not fully understand the structure they are themselves trying to build. And this is where Amorim's frustration starts to look less like ego and more like caution. Because if the hierarchy backed Ten Hag beyond logic, Ashworth's role was misjudged and changed direction within months, then why should Amorim, blindly trust their vision, right? Why should he accept limits on his authority when the people imposing those limits have yet to demonstrate, coherence themselves? I don't know if this makes sense to you, but INEOS talk a big game, but so far the evidence does not really match the talk. Just statements of intent without results to anchor them. And for a coach whose entire career has been built on clarity, that's a red flag. Because unlike directors and administrators at a club, the margin for error for a Manchester United manager or head coach isn't measured in years, it's measured in weekends. So when Amorim pushes back, when he publicly defines himself as a manager, this isn't really a power play. It's self-preservation in a way, because he's asking one simple question: who is actually in charge and what happens when things go wrong? And so Manchester United, once again, and this is the important part, as we seek to hire a new manager in the next few months, we will be forced to choose between belief in people and faith in processes. And that choice, more than any formation, or transfers or tactics, will define what comes next. So anyway, guys, I hope that you've enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Please share your thoughts in the comment section below. Until next time, cheers.